Something does not add up about the way they left, or the way they stayed distant, or the way the withdrawal happened. With that specific quality that never quite resolved into the clean, unambiguous "this is definitively over" energy that genuine endings tend to carry. Something in the texture of it was always slightly off from what a real conclusion feels like. Slightly unfinished, slightly still in motion even when the motion had apparently stopped. That quality is not your imagination. It is not the hoping part of you constructing meaning from absence, because meaning is more bearable than the alternative. It is the accurate perception of something that is genuinely present in the dynamic, something that the behavior is working to conceal, but that keeps surfacing anyway, in the specific involuntary ways that genuine feeling surfaces despite the management designed to suppress it. The avoidant tried to stop loving you, not as a dramatic conscious decision made in a single moment, not as the deliberate withdrawal of feeling through an act of will, but as the ongoing, effortful, largely unconscious project of someone whose entire psychological architecture was built around the premise that genuine attachment leads to genuine loss, and who encountered in you someone they became genuinely attached to, and who then, following the only internal logic their system knows, attempted to do what the system always does when genuine attachment becomes undeniable: reduce it, manage it, find the reasons it was not quite right, redirect the attention away from what the feeling actually was towards something more containable, more manageable, more compatible with the life organized around not needing that the avoidant had been successfully maintaining before you arrived in it. Something refused. The refusal is not poetic. It is not the romantic narrative of love triumphant over the defenses that tried to contain it. It is a psychological reality with a specific mechanism, the mechanism by which genuine feeling, once established at a certain depth, does not respond to the management techniques that shallower feeling responds to easily. Shallower feeling, the pleasant but ultimately low-stakes connection that the avoidant is comfortable with, that sits at the surface of the interior without pressing against anything genuinely defended, responds to management without difficulty. The avoidant can reduce it, redirect it, allow it to simply fade without the interior registering significant resistance. The management works because the feeling was never deep enough to have established roots that the management would have to uproot. Genuine feeling is different. Genuine feeling that has established itself in the interior, that pressed past the defense without targeting it, that reached the actual self rather than the presented self. That created the specific impression of someone who was actually known rather than simply encountered. That feeling does not respond to management the same way. It does not reduce when the avoidant attempts to reduce it, does not fade when the avoidant redirects attention away from it, does not comply with the interior instruction to care less, to want less, to find the reasons the connection was insufficient, and organize around those reasons until the connection feels smaller than it actually was. The something that refused was the feeling itself, refusing to be managed into something more convenient than what it actually was. This refusal creates a specific interior condition that the avoidant experiences as difficulty without always being able to accurately name what the difficulty is. Because from inside the avoidance system, the expectation is that the management will work, has always worked before, has successfully reduced previous connections to something more comfortable when the connections began pressing too insistently against the defended interior. The system has a proven track record of producing the distance that becomes the emotional fact, the reduced caring that becomes the actual experience, the managed down feeling that eventually corresponds to the managed down behavior. With you, the track record failed. The distance was produced, but the feeling did not follow the distance. The behavior organized itself around withdrawal, but the interior refused to organize itself around the same withdrawal. The management produced the external form of not caring, the cooling, the silence, the absence of the reaching toward that genuine caring typically expresses, without producing the internal reality of not caring that would make the external form honest. The avoidant was left in the specific, uncomfortable, unfamiliar position of performing a distance that their interior was not actually inhabiting, of expressing through behavior a reduction of feeling that was not occurring in the feeling itself, of living in the gap between what the behavior was communicating and what the interior was actually experiencing, a gap that is sustainable in the short term and increasingly difficult to maintain as the genuine feeling continues to refuse the management's instruction to become something smaller. That gap is worth understanding from the inside because it illuminates something important about what the avoidant is actually living with when the distance is maintained. but the refusal is ongoing. They are not in a state of genuine indifference that the behavior is honestly expressing. They are in a state of attempted indifference that the behavior is performing while the interior contradicts the performance. Every moment of the maintained distance is costing something. Not in the dramatic, obviously anguished way of someone who is visibly struggling with genuine conflict, but in the quieter, more chronic, more exhausting way of someone who is sustaining a position that their own interior is not supporting. The management requires effort when the feeling is genuine. Not the effort of someone who is consciously aware of the effort. The avoidance system is practiced enough that the management does not always register as effortful at the conscious level. But the effort is there, in the resources required to maintain the narrative that the distance is appropriate, that the feeling was overstated, that the connection was not quite what it appeared to be at its most genuine moments. The narrative keeps requiring maintenance because the feeling keeps contradicting it. The something that refused to stop loving keeps producing evidence against the narrative, in the thinking that returns to the person without permission, in the specific quality of the absence that has a named shape rather than the generic quality of someone who was simply not particularly significant, in the involuntary moments when the management is less practiced and the actual feeling surfaces in the form of genuine wanting that the narrative was supposed to have reduced. The avoidant who tried to stop loving you and found that something inside them refused is not in a comfortable position. That deserves to be said honestly rather than with the romanticizing quality that the phrase might invite. It is not the beautiful suffering of someone whose love is too real to be contained. It is the genuinely difficult, often confusing, not particularly comfortable experience of someone whose interior is not cooperating with the behavioral position their system determined was the safest available response to the specific threat of genuine attachment. The discomfort is real. The confusion is real. The experience of attempting a management that the interior keeps undermining is genuinely taxing in the specific way that internal contradiction is always taxing. The resource cost of maintaining a position that something inside is persistently challenging. And the refusal, the something that will not stop loving despite the avoidance attempted management of it, is also real. Not as comfort to the person who was loved and then encountered the distance. Not as the reassurance that the love was there even when the behavior was not reflecting it, but as the accurate psychological description of what is happening in the interior of someone whose system was not designed to accommodate genuine feeling and is now being required to accommodate it anyway, without adequate tools for doing so gracefully. What the person who loves the avoidant tends to feel in the presence of this dynamic, if they have the perceptual accuracy to feel the gap between what the behavior is communicating and what the interior is actually containing, is something that does not resolve neatly into any of the available emotional categories. Not simply hurt, though hurt is present. Not simply hope, though hope is also present. Something more textured than either. The specific disorienting experience of sensing that the distance is not the full truth. That the behavior is not an honest expression of the interior. That something is being managed that the management is not successfully containing. That sensing is accurate. It is the body's registration of genuine incongruence. The specific felt quality of someone who is performing a position their interior is not inhabiting. The body detects incongruence with considerable accuracy, even when the conscious mind is not processing it explicitly. And the person who loves the avoidant, who has been in close enough proximity to them to develop the specific perceptual attunement that genuine connection produces, tends to feel the incongruence with a precision that bypasses the intellectual assessment of the situation. Something is not adding up. The distance is not what it appears to be. The cooling is performed as much as it is felt. The something inside the avoidant that refused to stop loving keeps pressing against the management in ways that are felt before they are thought. The accurate perception of that incongruence is not the instruction to remain available indefinitely to conditions that are not yet providing what genuine mutual presence requires. It is not the reason to wait for the avoidant's internal contradiction to eventually produce the behavioral change that genuine love deserves to produce. It is not even the reassurance that the outcome will be the one that the genuine feeling on both sides would ideally generate. It is simply the accurate picture, the complete picture, the honest, clear-eyed, neither inflated nor minimized picture of what is actually happening in the interior of someone whose behavior suggests one thing and whose interior is containing another. That picture matters for clarity, for the prevention of the specific damage that comes from misreading the distance as the final statement about what was real, about whether the connection mattered, about whether the feeling was genuine or constructed. The connection was real, the feeling was genuine. The management produced the distance, and the something inside refused to stop loving, and the interior is containing the contradiction of both those things simultaneously. All of that is true. What is also true, and this is the part that the accurate picture must include, without the softening that compassion for the avoidance interior struggle might otherwise introduce, is that the refusal of the something inside to stop loving does not constitute showing up, does not constitute the adequate expression of genuine feeling in the form that genuine love deserves to take, does not bridge the gap between the real interior and the real impact of the insufficient behavior that the management produced. Loving someone in the interior while behaving in ways that communicate something else entirely is not the same as loving someone adequately, is not the same as the full present, behaviorally expressed, ordinary days showing up love that genuine connection requires to be genuinely sustaining for the person on the receiving end of it. The refusal to stop loving is real, and it is not enough. Both of those things are true, and neither cancels the other. The something inside that refused is genuine feeling that has not found its way to adequate expression. And genuine feeling that has not found its way to adequate expression is, from the perspective of the person who deserves to receive love in a form they can actually experience, the same as insufficient love in its practical impact. The heart that refused to stop loving needs to find its way into the behavior that reflects that refusal, needs to close the gap between what is felt and what is expressed, needs to become, through the genuine interior work that makes that closing possible, the showing up rather than the interior reality that the management prevents from becoming showing up. Until that gap closes, until the something that refused to stop loving finds the courage and the capacity and the genuine sustained effort to express itself in the ordinary days rather than the concealed interior, it is real and it is not enough. And the person who deserves that love deserves to hold both of those truths simultaneously, without collapsing either into the other, without allowing the reality of the genuine feeling to substitute for the reality of the adequate expression of it, without waiting indefinitely for the interior reality to find its way to the surface. The something inside them refused to stop loving, and you deserve to be loved by someone whose something does not have to refuse, whose love does not require management to contain, whose interior and behavior tell the same story, in the ordinary days, without the gap, without the management, without the refusal being the most honest thing available, just the love, present, expressed, chosen, shown up for. Daily, that is what you deserve, not the refusal to stop, the choosing to begin, fully, without reservation, in the form you can actually receive. The choosing to begin is where the real examination needs to happen, not in the feeling. The feeling has been established as genuine, has been described accurately and honestly throughout this conversation, is not in question as a psychological reality, but in what the feeling is actually doing. Whether it is moving toward the behavioral expression that genuine love requires to be receivable, or whether it is remaining in the interior as the permanent, unacted upon, cannot stop thinking quality of something that is real, but not translating into what the person on the other side actually needs it to translate into. This distinction matters more than the feeling itself, because the person who was loved by the avoidant, who was loved genuinely, in the specific way that the refusal to stop loving confirms, is not living inside the avoidance interior, is not able to experience the interior reality directly, can only experience what the interior produces in behavior. And if the interior produces the refusal to stop loving, but does not produce the showing up, does not produce the consistency, the presence, the ordinary day's effort that genuine love requires to be something the other person can actually build a life alongside, then the interior reality, however genuine, is not reaching the person it is for. This is the fundamental limitation of love that lives only in the interior. It is real, it is not nothing, but it is not receivable in the form it is currently taking. And love that is not receivable in the form it is taking is, for practical purposes, love that the person who deserves it cannot use. The avoidant understanding this, genuinely not as an intellectual proposition, but as the felt recognition of what the gap between their interior and their behavior has actually cost the person they loved, is the specific interior event that precedes genuine change. Not the guilt, though guilt is part of it. Not the regret, though regret is also present. But the specific, other-directed, genuinely accountable recognition that the love in the interior is not the same as the love in the behavior, and that the person who deserved the love was receiving the behavior rather than the interior, and that the behavior was not adequate to what they deserved. That recognition, when it arrives with genuine depth rather than the surface acknowledgement that can be accommodated without producing any actual change, tends to do something specific in the avoidant. It disrupts the narrative that made the distance sensible, the incompatibility story, the timing story, the something was not quite right story that the management constructed to justify the withdrawal. That narrative becomes harder to maintain in the presence of the genuine other-directed recognition. Because the narrative was always partially about protecting the avoidant from the full weight of the recognition, distributing the responsibility outward into the timing or the circumstances or the other person's particular qualities in a way that reduced the direct confrontation with the simpler and more uncomfortable truth. The truth that the distance was the fear. The narrative was the management of the fear, and the love, the genuine, refusing to stop, carrying the person in the interior love, was always present underneath both. When the narrative disrupts, when the genuine other-directed recognition makes the story harder to sustain, what the avoidant is left with is the unmediated reality of having loved someone genuinely and having allowed the fear to determine the behavior rather than the love. Of having had a genuine interior and having produced an insufficient exterior. Of having refused, at the level of the something inside, to stop loving, while simultaneously, at the level of the behavioral choices the fear was making, acting in ways that communicated to the person being loved that the love was not what it was. That unmediated reality is the most honest position the avoidant has been in with respect to the connection. It is also the most uncomfortable, because it does not have the buffer of the narrative, does not have the management producing a more comfortable version of what happened. It is simply the truth, held without the usual protection, pressing against the interior with the full weight of what it actually is. Some avoidants, encountering that unmediated truth, find in it the genuine motivation that previous phases of the dynamic did not produce. Not the motivation of potential loss, which was present in the regret phase, and proved insufficient to sustain behavioral change past the point where the loss was no longer immediately threatening. But the motivation of genuine accountability, the specific other-directed "this is what I actually did" recognition, that is organized around the impact on the person, rather than the experience of the avoidant. That motivation has a different quality than the loss-motivated reaching back. It is not organized around restoring what the avoidant is without. It is organized around becoming adequate to what the person they love actually deserves. And that distinction between the motivation to restore access and the motivation to become genuinely worthy of it is the distinction that determines whether what follows is genuine change or the familiar cycle of approach and retreat. Genuine change motivated by genuine accountability looks different from the regret phase reaching back. It is slower, less immediately dramatic, less characterized by the emotional intensity of the acute loss phase, and more characterized by the quiet, unglamorous, nobody is watching quality of someone doing actual interior work rather than performing the emotional experience of wanting to do it. It tends to involve the therapeutic relationship, the sustained, skilled, professionally supported engagement with the interior structures that build the pattern. Not because therapy is the only path, but because the pattern was built in conditions that the avoidant's own interior resources were not adequate to address alone. And changing it tends to require the kind of sustained, relationally corrective experience that genuine therapeutic work provides. The experience of being genuinely present with another person, the therapist, in conditions that are specifically designed to be safe enough for the defenses to gradually relax. The repeated, accumulating experience of genuine exposure not producing the catastrophic outcome that the architecture was built to prevent. That experience, sustained over sufficient time, begins to do what the love of the person who was hurt could not do alone. Not because that love was insufficient, but because the change needed to happen in conditions where the stakes were therapeutic rather than romantic. Where the genuine exposure was to someone whose professional orientation was toward the avoidance development rather than toward their own genuine relational needs. Where the fear could be felt and examined and gradually updated without the complication of the avoidance behavior simultaneously impacting someone they genuinely cared about. The person who loves the avoidant does not need to wait for this process to complete, does not need to hold the door open at personal cost while the avoidant does or does not engage with the work that genuine change requires. The door can be held, or it can be closed, Or it can be somewhere in the ambiguous middle that honest uncertainty sometimes produces. But whatever position the door is in, the person's life continues in full. The genuine forward motion is real. The complete inhabitation of the present is what is being built regardless of what the avoidance development is or is not producing. What is worth knowing, what the accurate picture of the avoidance interior provides, is simply the truth about what was real, about what the something inside them that refused to stop loving actually means. About the specific psychological reality of genuine feeling that has not found adequate expression rather than the absence of feeling that the behavior might suggest. That truth does not obligate, does not require particular action, does not determine the door's position or the life's direction or the degree to which the present is genuinely inhabited rather than held in suspension for someone else's becoming. It simply completes the picture, adds the interior reality to the behavioral evidence, allows the person who loves the avoidant to see the full thing rather than only the part that the behavior makes visible. And the full thing is this: the avoidant tried to stop loving you, used the only tools their system provided, attempted the management that had always worked before, constructed the narrative, produced the distance, maintained the withdrawal, and something inside them refused. Not loudly, not heroically, not in any form that made the refusal visible or useful or receivable by the person it was for. Quietly, persistently, in the interior, in the cannot stop thinking and the shaped absence and the specific quality of the silence that was never quite indifferent enough to be honest, that refusal is real. It is also, in its current form, not enough. Both true, both held, without collapsing either. The something inside them that refused to stop loving deserves to find its way into the form that makes it receivable, into the showing up. The ordinary days. The consistent, present, genuine behavioral expression of the interior reality that has been there all along, refusing to be managed into something smaller than what it actually is. Whether it finds that form, whether the refusal becomes the foundation for the genuine, sustained, behaviorally expressed love that the person deserves to receive, is the avoidance question. What belongs to the person who loves them is different. The knowledge that the love was real, the knowledge that the refusal happened, the knowledge that real love in an interior that cannot yet express it adequately is real and not enough simultaneously. And the knowledge, clear, unambiguous, earned through everything that has been honestly examined, that they deserve the version that is both real and enough at the same time, in the same person, in the ordinary days, without the management, without the gap, without the something inside having to refuse anything. Because the love is simply there, expressed, chosen, shown up for, received. That is what the real love deserves to become, for whoever is capable of making it that. The version that is both real and enough does not arrive as a reward for having loved correctly, does not come as the natural culmination of having understood the avoidance psychology thoroughly enough, or having held the accurate picture clearly enough, or having done the interior work of reclamation with sufficient completeness. It arrives, when it arrives, through the entirely separate process of two people who have both done enough of their own genuine work to show up in the same space, without the fear running everything. That separateness is worth sitting with, because one of the persistent and quietly damaging patterns in the thinking that surrounds this kind of dynamic is the implicit assumption that the understanding, the deep, compassionate, psychologically accurate understanding of why the avoidant is the way they are, and what the dynamic was actually producing, somehow creates a pathway toward the connection becoming adequate. That if the avoidance psychology is understood clearly enough, if the pattern is seen accurately enough, if the compassion extended toward the defended interior is genuine enough, something in that understanding will eventually translate into the conditions that make the love receivable. It does not work that way. Understanding is not a bridge. Compassion is not a catalyst for someone else's change. The accurate picture of why the avoidant could not show up adequately does not produce the conditions in which they will show up adequately. Those conditions are produced by the avoidant's own genuine, internally motivated, sustained engagement with the interior work that changes the pattern, not by the quality of the other person's understanding. This is one of those truths that is intellectually clear and emotionally difficult. Because the person who has developed the understanding, who has arrived at the genuine, compassionate, accurate picture of what was happening in the avoidance interior, has invested something real in the development of that understanding. It is not a cold, clinical analysis. It is the hard-won product of genuine engagement with the complexity of another person's interior life. And the discovery that the investment in understanding does not create leverage over the outcome, does not give the person who loves the avoidant any additional influence over whether the avoidant chooses the work that genuine change requires, can feel like the understanding was wasted. It was not wasted. The understanding was not for the purpose of influencing the avoidance development. It was for the purpose of the person's own clarity, their own accurate reading of a situation that was producing confusion, their own ability to see what was real without the distortions that either hope or hurt tend to apply to the incomplete picture. That clarity serves the person who developed it, not as leverage over the avoidant, not as the foundation of a strategy for producing a particular outcome, but as the genuine, self-serving, entirely appropriate resource of someone who now has an accurate picture of what they were navigating and what it was actually producing, and what therefore their own genuine choices going forward can be made from. Clarity is always for the person who has it, not for the person who is being seen clearly. The avoidant is not changed by being understood. The person who understands is changed, is freed from the confusion, the self-doubt, the specific disorientation of loving someone whose behavior and interior were so thoroughly disconnected that the behavior consistently communicated something that was not the interior reality. The freedom from that confusion is the return on the investment in understanding, not the avoidance change, not the connection becoming adequate, not the something inside them that refused to stop loving, finding its way into the form that makes it receivable. The person's own freedom to see clearly and choose from clarity rather than from the fog of incomplete information and the distortions that hope and hurt apply to it. Choosing from clarity has a different quality than choosing from confusion. It is not necessarily easier. The choices that clarity makes available are not always the comfortable choices, are not always the choices that the feeling would prefer to make if the feeling were the only factor. But they are honest choices, choices that are actually made by the person making them, rather than choices that are made by the situation's particular emotional gravity, or by the hope that has been managing the incomplete picture, or by the confusion that could not arrive at a genuine decision because the information required for a genuine decision was not fully available. Genuine decisions require genuine information, and the accurate picture, the full, honest, neither inflated nor minimized account of what was actually happening in the dynamic, what was real in the avoidance interior, what the refusal to stop loving means and what it does not mean, what the gap between the interior and the behavior cost the person receiving the behavior rather than the interior. That picture is genuine information. It is the material from which genuine decisions can actually be made. The decision that emerges from that information is not predetermined. It is not the script of what someone in this situation is supposed to decide. It is genuinely open, genuinely dependent on the specific person, the specific circumstances, the specific sense of what they actually want and what they are actually willing to continue and what their genuine life actually requires at this particular point in its unfolding. Some people, with the full accurate picture, will decide that the potential of the connection, the real feeling on both sides, the genuine quality of what was present at its truest moments, the specific quality of the something inside the avoidant that refused to stop loving, warrants continued availability to the possibility of the avoidance development producing something that the connection can become. That is a genuine choice made from genuine information. It is not naivety if it is made with clear eyes. It is not the false hope of someone who does not understand what they are choosing to remain available to. It is the informed, clear-eyed, genuinely voluntary decision of someone who has the full picture and has decided that the picture warrants the continued investment. Other people with the same full accurate picture will decide that the potential is not sufficient to justify the continued investment, that the real feeling, genuine as it is, has not been producing the behavioral reality that the person's genuine life requires, that the something inside the avoidant that refused to stop loving is real and real is not enough, and the gap between real and enough is not a gap they are willing to continue inhabiting. That is also a genuine choice made from genuine information. It is not hardness, it is not the failure to appreciate what was real, it is the honest, self-respecting, clear-eyed recognition that real love, in an interior that cannot adequately express it, is not the same as the love the person deserves to receive. Both decisions are legitimate. Both are products of genuine information honestly held. Both are expressions of genuine self-knowledge, knowledge of what the specific person actually needs, actually wants, actually can and cannot continue to be in proximity to, without cost to themselves. What matters is not which decision is made. What matters is that the decision is actually made, genuinely from the full picture, from the person's own honest accounting of what their life requires, rather than arrived at by default, by the accumulated weight of the dynamic's gravity, by the confusion that the incomplete picture maintained, by the hoping that was managing the information rather than the person managing the hoping. The avoidant tried to stop loving you. Something inside them refused. Those two facts together constitute the specific interior condition of someone who is genuinely caught between a feeling they cannot manage away and a pattern they have not yet changed, caught between the real love and the inadequate expression of it, between the something that refused and the capacity that has not yet developed to make the refusal, into the showing up that genuine love deserves to become. That caught quality is the avoidance experience. It is real, and it is uncomfortable, and it is genuinely theirs to navigate through whatever process their own development eventually produces. Your experience is different. Your experience includes the knowledge of what was real, the genuine connection, the genuine feeling on both sides, the specific quality of something that was present in the dynamic at its most honest moments. It includes the accurate picture of why the dynamic could not become adequate, despite the genuine feeling that was always present. It includes the clarity that the understanding produces, the freedom from the confusion, the ability to see what was real without the distortions of either hope or hurt. And it includes the life, the actual, present, genuinely yours, fully inhabitable life that has been there throughout, and that does not require the avoidance interior development to complete itself before it is worth showing up for completely. That life continues to accumulate, continues to develop texture and content and the specific, genuine forward motion of a person who is actually in it. Continues to offer what it has always offered, the genuine, nourishing, actually present quality of a life that is being lived rather than managed, that is being inhabited rather than monitored, that is being engaged with fully rather than partially, with the remainder held in reserve for the resolution of someone else's interior contradiction. The accumulation is not dramatic. Day by day it is unremarkable. The ordinary things, the genuine engagement with work, with connection, with the specific interests and impulses and creative or intellectual life that belongs to the person, these do not feel like the building of something significant in the moment of their happening. They feel like Tuesday, like the unremarkable texture of a day that is simply being lived. But Tuesday accumulated into Wednesday, and Wednesday into the following week, and the weeks into the months produces something. Produces the genuine, embodied, not performed but actually felt sense of a life that is genuinely one's own. That does not have someone else's interior process as its primary organizing concern. That is moving in a direction determined by the person's own genuine wanting rather than by the management of the dynamic's emotional weather. That sense, the quiet, cumulative, increasingly solid sense of a life genuinely inhabited, is not the consolation for having loved the avoidant. It is not the what you get instead. It is the actual thing, the primary thing. The thing that was always the point and that the dynamic was temporarily displacing from its rightful position at the center of the person's own interior life. The avoidant something that refused to stop loving is their interior reality. It will do whatever it does, will remain unacted upon, or will eventually find the courage and the capacity to become the showing up it has always been pointing toward. Will stay in the interior as the permanent, unresolvable contradiction of genuine feeling and inadequate expression, or will eventually close the gap through the genuine work that closing it requires. That outcome is not yours to determine, not yours to influence, not yours to structure your present around in the anticipation of a particular resolution. What is yours is simpler and more durable than any particular resolution of the avoidance interior contradiction. It is the clear-eyed knowledge of what was real, the freedom that genuine clarity produces, the life that continues in full regardless, and the self-genuine, fully arrived at, carrying the specific and irreplaceable quality of authentic presence that touched the avoidance defended interior without trying to. That self continues to be exactly what it is. Not diminished by the dynamic, not defined by the avoidance capacity or incapacity to receive it, not waiting for the something inside them to find its way to the surface before being completely, genuinely, fully itself. That self was real before the avoidant encountered it, is real now, will be real in every space it inhabits going forward, touching things that were built to remain untouched, not through strategy, not through effort, simply by being what it genuinely is, completely, in the ordinary days that are, it turns out, the whole of the thing, the whole of the life. Worth every bit of presence available to bring to them, right now, without waiting, without reservation, without the portion held elsewhere. All of it here, all of it yours, all of it enough. All of it enough is not a conclusion the mind arrives at cleanly. It is something the body learns slowly, through the accumulated evidence of days that were genuinely lived rather than held in suspension. Through the quiet, unremarkable proof of a self that kept showing up for its own life, and found in the showing up that the life was worth it. Not because the loss was not real, because the life was more real. That is the whole of it.